So Sairee, why don't I start with you? You have 19 plus million women on your platform, Sheroes. Why don't you give us an insight on what are the top of mind issues, concerns, or what's really happening with women?
The first week when the lockdown happened, I heard a lot of women say, "हम तो घर पे ही रहते हैं. We are always at home." So, it doesn't matter. In some ways, we've always been locked down. And I heard a lot of that. The second is, I think for the first time, we are recognizing all the work that women end up doing. Like, I've never seen a woman make, parathas or poha and put it up on Twitter, but clearly men are doing it. And, obviously also kind of goes back to, that men sell their work much more, than women do. And third is, I think the amount of emotional labor women have to do has just increased because everybody's kind of away from their workplaces, but women are not. For women, it means more work. So we run a helpline on Sheroes, and we've seen the use of helpline surge in middle of this whole crisis for a couple of reasons. One, anxiety issues. For some people, life has slowed down, but most women now are sort of uh, running like a 3-shift, ship. So it's clearly a lot of anxiety. Two, emotional expectations of having everybody at home, lack of personal spaces. And the other thing we noticed was increase in amount of domestic violence. Third thing, which is very, very interesting is, we run a remote work line of business where we certify women, they work from home for large companies. So it was hard. It was a concept style. We had to say that remote work is legitimate. You should all try it. It's good for your business. And suddenly we are seeing that everybody knows it. It's been sold. And I think that's going to impact women in a positive way because as more and more remote work happens, the field will get a lot more even. And fourth is I've been tracking women only internet use case for, as long as I can remember. What the pandemic has done is it's moved children's studies online. Schools have gone online. Groceries are online. Government services are online. And that's driving up adoption of internet and usage of internet by women. So just to give you a perspective, we're almost near 20 million women. And that number was supposed to be a 2020 target, right?
Wow.
We are seeing a surge in internet adoption for women, and that's, I think, going to be a great outcome because it will drive 3-4 things. It will drive self-employment, it will drive micro-entrepreneurship, it will obviously drive women's health initiatives, information sharing, more work around what I call creation of women's internet. So that's the good thing coming out of the pandemic.
Venki, you've been a finance professional before you took a break and became a celebrated author. This whole career pivot that you have done, what was the thinking behind it? And is there any insight which would help some people who currently are thinking of making a pivot?
I've been in corporate jobs, mostly, the high pressure, high demand, deadline driven type of job. I felt that something was somehow lacking. I had this dream of wanting to write a book one day, and finally I started doing it, but it was in fits and starts. So I'd write a few pages and then 3 months no activity. So at some point I started to be regular, and I actually realized, interestingly, that the writing fed into the corporate work that I did, and that continues to this day. We actually tend to use I'm using a stereotype here, tend to use too much of our left brains at work. And sometimes, it helps to just see the bigger picture, and actually writing kind of helped me do that. So I think my productivity, even in the traditional corporate work, improved substantially after I started writing. I think at some point, I think it reached a certain critical mass, and I decided that I needed to take a break and actually, work on finishing the book. That's the other thing I realized. Rather than waiting for this burst of inspiration, something done for a short period of time every single day is far more effective than this big bang, I'm going to sit for, I'm going to go to, I don't know, Lonavala or the Himalayas for a month and write. That doesn't work. So that was the other myth that got shattered. I think, leaving my job, and my last job was 5 years ago, was not an easy decision because there was a huge financial trade-off. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, I'm actually able to do corporate work through my consulting firm. And so actually, I've in some ways found some sort of healthy balance between the two. There are still a lot of trade-offs, but I wouldn't trade this off for what I had earlier.
I keep saying that human imagination is so interesting that whatever you imagine will always come true because it was always based on some reality. Your book is based on a pandemic, so you imagine this. Can you talk to us as to the threads of disparate events which made you imagine this crisis even before it happened?
Unfortunately, there are some parallels between the book and what's actually transpired. I actually read a lot before I wrote Kalkut. So I researched weapons of mass destruction a fair bit. So I researched not just bioweapons, but also, chemical warfare and nuclear weapons and so on. It's actually a little scary how easy it is to access some of these things. And the other realization which struck me was that, till about 70, 80 years ago, the world was a pretty dangerous place. You had World War One, World War Two, famines, frequent wars. It's almost like some form of disruption was a natural state of mankind. And then you had the Cold War, which was surprisingly a period of relative peace with a few skirmishes like Vietnam here and there, but otherwise a period of relative peace. The last 20, 30 years has been some sort of weird transition period. But if I look ahead, there are still a lot of things which bother me. There's the climate crisis. It's actually upon us now. And if you see around, you're seeing increasing evidence of abnormal weather events, unseasonal rainfall. Right. 10, 20 years out, would this lead to climate refugees and all sorts of other problems? We don't really know. And then there are also other things, right? The fabric of our society, in my opinion, has been shaken a little, both for the positive and negative, by social media, by the end of data privacy, and so on and so forth. And then there are other things like, oil has been the predominant fuel for the last, whatever X, 100+ years. And suddenly that is now being, that is being disrupted now. So it's going to have far-reaching impacts on our lives.
Interesting that you make a point that there could be further disruptions of different kinds which could face humanity. And probably it's time to build those scenarios, like from a consulting perspective, to do the scenario building and also to plan out, therefore, what could be the response in such a scenario. I'm taking off from the imagination part. So here is somebody who has used imagination to write a work of fiction, which is so close to reality now a year later. So I want to ask Sairee that in her vision, so what could be the future, course of action for women, especially women in South Asia, where they have always been disadvantaged. So Sairee, what are your thoughts or, hopes for the future?
Right. So look, I may sound obviously biased here, but I definitely think one of the reasons the world is where it is because too many men are running it. If you look at the power center of the world, right, the white male is not just a stereotype. The white male is a data fact now, right? Like whether it's Fortune 500s or whether it is, heads of states, you leave aside those 8 women who are doing well in terms of running their respective countries, New Zealand and Germany and Norway. But look, we're in a very skewed world. Like what Venki said, we've had a good run. We've had good 30 years in spite of all the threats, right? We're doing okay as a society. But what we're not doing okay is on creating sense of balance. And we are clearly low on emotional quotient, right? As I think leaderships across the world lack EQ. This is clearly part of the reason why I think having more women uh, in positions of leadership, and when I say leadership, I don't mean just the C-suite. I don't just mean the Wall Street. I think women need more voice. Women need more resources and more access across tables. You start with homes. You start with sharing labor at home. So men may have discovered doing dishes in the pandemic, but this needs to become mainstream, right? This needs to become, and I think it goes back into how we build the society, right? So when we send children to school, we know that these are the skills we need to teach them. We need to teach them a sense of equal ownership. These are life skills. These are not a woman's job, right? And I think uh, and this is a great time to start doing it because now it's been imposed upon us. We might as well turn that crisis into an opportunity. I see this this situation as a catalyst, because it's shown us the mirror as a society on how prepared or how underprepared we were. I mean, for years we've sort of written off housewives. It just breaks my heart to see that, because the truth is we can all do without offices, but we can't do without homes. And I think the lens we have is very short term. And and when you start thinking of these things in a connected way, equity, long term sustenance of humankind, and a more peaceful world, if I may use that word.
I really liked something that you said, and I think that's a very powerful statement, which is we have realized that we can make do without offices, but we need a home. My wife is somebody who decided to, devote her entire energy to the home. And there is no decision that I take without consulting her. So whether the finances or even my career decisions, I respect her opinion, because she will give me her opinion based by evaluating so many facets of kids, education, finances, stress, health, all of it. Whereas I might be taking a much more narrower view. And I also like the idea of what you talked about. Why have we missed women from the giving them center stage, is because of the kind of stereotypes that we have built around leadership. Leadership has always been about masculine, a kind of a stereotype. Whether we go back in history into Indian ethos and mythology as well, the women, the female leaders that we read about or we see are largely a mold of the male block. Either they are fighters, warriors, or they're very strong, iron-willed. And I'll not get into naming some of those, but that's a stereotype that we have built. The best form of leadership is the model of parenting. And when it comes to parenting, the stereotype that we should all aspire to is that of a mother. A mother is relentless in ensuring that the safety, sustenance, the health and care of the, family is taken care of, the children is taken care of. A mother practices tough love like a father cannot. And that's the best model of leadership, using tough love. So being harsh where it is needed, but providing the emotional support where it is needed, and ensuring that, and the only thing that they're interested in is that the success of the child. And that's what every leadership should do. I think it's a great point to look at recasting leadership models which come from inspirations from women, rather than just focus on the male form, which has been the case so far. Recently, I came across an article on leadership. It piqued my interest because the article talks about, for leaders to become much more emotionally anchored, they need to learn how to appreciate art and good food. So the finer things in life, when you start appreciating art, or when you start building that skill of appreciating art, literature, food, you are dealing with a lot of abstractness, which takes away from the logical part. So leaders who have a appreciation for abstract stuff like art, literature, and food tend to deal with crisis much better, because they are comfortable with that ambiguity and things not going their way, not being able to explain all of it. So I think that EQ part is a lot to do with what we talked about as which comes naturally to women, but it is also about the finer things in life and getting to appreciate those.
Many years ago, I had attended a Vipassana meditation camp. So this is like a mindfulness retreat where for 10 days, you don't have any stimuli. You can't talk to anybody, no TV, no newspaper, nothing. And in some ways, this whole period of lockdown and the COVID-related crisis is like a giant Vipassana for the whole world. We have become used to a consumption-based model. Now we are learning to consume less. And we are actually beginning to realize that, there's a difference between what you need and what you might, generally want to accumulate. So in some ways, it's a giant reset towards discovering that inner balance, because what's driving this whole aggressive, more is always better culture is that inability to be, in some ways, and it's a bad word actually, content, just to be content is such a bad word nowadays, right? That itself tells you how far we've come from balance.
I'm very happy that I left my job while in the midst of the crisis because I cannot imagine, me being on phone calls and video calls throughout the day and breaking the calm, meditative space that is available to my wife. She would have thrown me out of the house if I had had back-to-back calls throughout the day, because then I don't give her space, which is what Sairee was talking about, that, their personal space gets intruded upon. I am yet to see a homemaker who uh, is not able to craft a meal or to take care of the family with whatever little is available at home. And that ability to do with little and scarce resources is amazing, right? Is there a learning for us from that? Because I've been reading a lot about layoffs and stuff. Is there a way for people to figure out that they could make do with pay cuts, but not make do with layoffs? Do you think that's a crazy idea, or that's immensely doable?